looks like we have several folks that have joined us today for a webinar. We're going to talk cybersecurity, and then we're just going to specifically go through Microsoft 365 and some things that we can do in the healthcare practice setting to make that more secure for you. We hope to keep this moving along and make it at a level where folks can get something out of it and not get too technical. I believe there's a Q&A function. If you do have questions, you can put them there. We might answer, if we have time, we'll answer them here. And if not, we'll certainly get back to you offline and make sure that your questions get answered. So today I'm joined with Daniel Wienerville, our practice lead of consulting here at Stringfellow Technology Group. He'll tell you more about himself in a minute. And then I'm Edward Stringfellow. Stringfellow Technology Group I founded in 2005 with the goal of providing to be a great partner to businesses. And now today we've kind of transformed into really focusing on partnering with healthcare providers, clinics, and practices to help them provide great patient care and then allow us to kind of handle the technology, as it were. So with that, I'll turn it over to Daniel. He's got kind of some opening remarks and some things he's going to go through, and then it'll come back to me and we'll kind of dig into the nitty-gritty of 365.
All right, so good midday. I guess it's not morning or afternoon, so we'll just start with the midday greeting. So a little bit about me. I've got about 35 years of IT background, primarily with Fortune 100 companies. Spent the last 23 plus years working for a large healthcare system and primarily in all infrastructure, delivery, multi-tenancy, and so forth. And what we're going to talk about today is primarily a little bit of history on cybersecurity and healthcare, and then make some opening remarks related to what the HHS says and some HIPAA journal news articles, just to get a baseline of where security is today for healthcare clients. So if we could jump into so healthcare is prime target. The last article I read said 66% of healthcare entities had some form of ransomware attack. Now, it doesn't mean they were breached, it just meant they were exposed to ransomware in some form or fashion. So it is on everybody's mind right now about how do we continue to implement policies, procedures, and then put those into action through infrastructure components, through monitoring and management to help secure our endpoints. So if we baseline on the HHS, there was an article produced in April of this year, and the Deputy Secretary, Adria Palm, made these comments in her opening letter, and I think they kind of really solidify kind of where we are today. She says, cybersecurity is no longer a one-step solution. Rather, it is vital that the entire healthcare and public health sector has cybersecurity strategy, including zero trust approach. Healthcare delivery organizations need to make bold changes and significant investments to defend the institutions that make up the PHP sector. She goes on to say that cybersecurity is not simply an IT issue. It is an enterprise-wide issue that must be addressed by everyone in an organization, from the healthcare professionals to administrators and executives. And I think that kind of sums up everything from where we are today. Cybersecurity is top of mind for every business, not necessarily just healthcare, but it is critical for us to get out in front of these things with a strategy that you can monitor and manage over time, that creates that depth and defense layers within your organization. And the reason for that is, when you look at what's going on that slide, it's 9.23 million in 2021 for an average breach. That is bumped up to 10.3 in 2023. And so it's not just the cost of that breach anymore. That figure 2 on the left, it shows anywhere from 277 days to 329 days to recover from a breach. And typically it's 6 to 7 months just to detect the breach. So you're talking about 9 to 11 months of recovery just in data. That's not credibility impact. That's really just your system recovery and the monetary value of that recovery. So it's really important to look at these things on these 5 different threat levels. So it's social engineering, which is all your phishing, your fraudulent texting, your calls. You got ransomware, which is really your malware that starts out really as phishing, that then come in and compromise credentials, that then get redeployed through malware in your organization. And then you have, theft of equipment, you have accidental or malicious data loss, which you then impact your business continuity. And then, as we bring these medical devices more into line with technology and integration of those technologies, they become more another point of attack. And so it's going to be really critical for us to have solutions and policies and protections in each of these areas that's based on your risk posture and your cybersecurity strategy. Yep. So how we do that now is what Edward will take over and talk about.
Yeah, and I think it's helpful. I mean, we've all seen the slides, and it's kind of, I think at every conference now, whether it's HIMSS or MGMA, I mean, cybersecurity is top of mind. And I want to make sure we don't go numb to it either, because a lot of times we can just talk, and everyone's like, okay, I get it. Well, what can I do about that? And so that's what I'm going to dive into, is some what I would consider pretty low level practical things around the 365 environment that we can look at and do as a COO or a practice admin or even a provider, things that I think it would be helpful to have awareness around, especially if you're using the Microsoft 365 suite. So jumping right in there, we're going to go through kind of four things here to talk about how we can utilize Microsoft 365 to really minimize security threats in your environment. So step one is, as with most things, let's have an initial configuration review. It is what it is, whether you have an IT partner, an internal IT team, you have a staff member that handles IT. I mean, if you ask them, hey, how's it? Everybody says, oh, how's it set up? How's it working? Well, in the absence of a fire or the absence of something bad going on, most people unfortunately default to it's probably set up correctly. That's not necessarily the case with 365 anymore. Every month, every quarter, they release new features, they change configuration settings. I mean, it is a growing, moving application at this point, and it's very important to keep up with those changes. So when we talk about an initial configuration review, who are your global administrators? All the time, it's the global administrator account is the practice admin's account or the head partner's account, and that's for a number of reasons that's bad, right? And we're going to try to not solve all the problems today. I think awareness is really important. But if you're the global admin and you're using the account that you use to check your email, that's not good. So we don't want that. Basic MFA. So we've all heard about getting a code or a text login for our banking. You'll typically ask, is MFA turned on? And the reality is the answer is yes, but the reality is it's really not turned on for all users in the way it should be. Applications. We're moving to this cloud-based world, and unfortunately users sometimes connect outside applications into your 365 environment, whether knowingly or unknowingly. That goes undetected. The application on the other end has a breach, and then that's how they get access to your systems. A number of times, whether it's the target breach or the kind of almost at this point weekly or monthly healthcare clinic breaches, it's really a third-party application a lot of times where they're coming into that 365 environment. So that's important. And then lastly, guest access. Yes, we want technology to be easy, but on one end, usability, and then the other end, security. And so if it's just wide open and we get guest access, wide open, well, that candidly could be a security issue. So we want to look at, how is guest access configured? Are all the accounts in your 365 environment known? You'd be surprised. Daniel mentioned, I think it was 329 days to detect a breach. Well, nobody knows who Jim Smith is that has showed up in your account list, 6 months ago. And the reality is it's that hacker that's watching, waiting to launch their attack. Did I miss anything, Daniel, on the
Yep.
initial configuration review?
No, I think that pretty well covers it.
Okay. So now diving in, step one. This is super easy. 365 has a built-in security score in your dashboard. We'll put it in the show notes, the direct link to get there for your organization. This is not a test. We're not trying to score 100, but we are trying to score 60% or higher. So it should be noted if you're under a 60%, there actions need to be taken. That's not good. 60 or more doesn't necessarily mean it's configured right, but that is a good sign, right? This, unfortunately, is a 21.93%, and we see those often when we're brought in to look at working with people. The good news is we're going to go through some pretty easy steps to get that score up fairly quickly and painlessly. But if your security score is under a 60, this is something that I really, these next basic steps I think could be really helpful in remediating that. Step one, you've got to have the right tools. And in this case, what I'm talking about is the right Microsoft licensing. The chart here is meant to really just show you how confusing the licensing is, not necessarily to convey anything necessarily helpful. Daniel spends more time than he would like looking at this chart and figuring out of the features needed on the left, what's the best bundle on the right, and how do we structure all that. I mean, when we onboard a client, it is always surprising the discussions that pop up around licensing. But the reality is this: if you don't have the correct licensing, you will not have the correct 365 tools. We often find, I think the biggest thing I'd point out on the right of this in the purple is Office 365. That's legacy. That is the old SKUs that have been around since almost 2006, I think, Daniel. Long time. Like, that's what I started. It was called BPOS. Anyway, we won't go down memory lane, but that's the old SKUs that candidly a lot of organizations, they're like, oh, well, yeah, no, we've got 365. Well, you do, but it's Office 365, and it is basic, Word, Excel, PowerPoint plus email. It doesn't have any of the security features or the advanced access features that we'll be talking about today. So again, not a huge thing to resolve, but if you're on the wrong licensing SKUs, there's no way you're going to win. So from that perspective, engage with someone that can help walk you through where you are and then getting on the right licenses that you need to be on. I'll go ahead and give you the cheat sheet. Is this? It's Microsoft Business Premium is the license that you want for your back office users, your providers, your heavy users of Office and those things. And then they have a frontline worker. It's the F3 that we typically use for our folks that basically need email access and then EHR access. So, those are the two that you'll end up with. Larger orgs can sometimes go to the 365 E5. So get your licensing correct. Once that's done, now we can talk about some of these 365, what we call the security baseline. This is at Stringfellow, we've come up with this. We just call it our Microsoft 365 security baseline. And it's basically a set of best practices and configurations that we know are going to deliver that 60+% security score. And more importantly, it's going to deliver actual security. So policies and procedures, all of those things are important from maybe a compliance standpoint, but we want to actually enforce it where it's working, actually working for you and doing the job. So let's dive into this. Again, these are three. They're pretty high level. Should be easy enough to follow along. So conditional access, a username and a password will not do anything for security. I think everybody understands that at this point. It's just not. A username and a password can be guessed very easily, and then once it's guessed, the hackers have access to your system. So we can't just do that. We have to go to this next level, which is called conditional access. And what that does is it not only says, hey, do you know your username and your password? It looks at what device you're doing. It looks at what application you're trying to access, where you are physically in the world, and based on all these signals, the system's going to make a decision, and it's going to say, hey, we're going to allow access because that's Edward. He used this device, an hour ago before he went to lunch. Location hasn't changed. All the boxes are checked. Let him in, right? Or he left the office. Now he is at home So he's at a different location using a different device. So we're not as comfortable with that. So we're going to require an MFA prompt. And then lastly, we're going to see that Edward is now logging in from a foreign country that he somehow traveled to in an hour and a half. Well, that's called impossible travel, and then we're going to block that access. So just having conditional access on will make sure that basically, even if your credentials are compromised, that when we go through that process, it will correctly allow, require MFA or block access. Daniel, did I miss anything there? Is that making sense?
No, and what I would add to that though is, you can block countries by default. So it's not just if you're traveling back and forth, you can just block countries. So if you've got known areas where you've seen, like on the government's block list, do not travel list, you're probably going to want to block those by default. And so you can do that right up front. So it just blocks everything. And then you create exceptions for travelers as you need to.
Correct. And at Stringfellow, our security baseline has actually been, historically, we just do US, Canada, Mexico. And then we have a process if a user is going to travel internationally, they just contact us and we put them on a travel list so that they can access their stuff, just like the credit card companies used to do. Cool thing is even that is becoming not needed because this stuff's getting smart enough to even, it'll make a real-time decision. But no, very good point. If other than leisure travel, if there's no business case for accessing your stuff outside the US, then yeah, it should just be blocked, right? I mean, Daniel brings up a good point. Like, we don't need all this fancy stuff to say, hey, like we will never access these systems out of the US. Okay, well then we can do that. And that's a good point. Passwordless authentication. So if there's no password to guess, then we're one step closer or one step further away from the hackers trying to get to us. And what passwordless authentication really means is, like, I don't know my 365 password. I have one, but I don't know what it is because that's not what we're using to log on. Basically what it's saying is now I have a token, which is either a smartphone, it could be a physical token, it could be a Prox badge. But we have a physical token now when we log in, and so we don't get prompted for a password. We get shown a code, and in some cases along with the location of where we're logging in to help us make an informed decision about what this is. And then we have to go and match the code, and then boom, we're logged in. Typically faster than your password. You can't forget this because it's showing you a code. This actually works really, really well. I think in most environments, especially healthcare practices, this cuts down on password resets a lot and just makes it's more secure, more user friendly. So we've implemented this kind of as a standard, and I think universally people really, really like it. So passwordless authentication should be configured. Again, you'll need the correct licensing to do that. Office Defender. So this was formerly called Advanced Threat Protection. So it's a big eye chart here. The reality is what this is your spam, your email and phishing protection. And this has evolved over time. It used to be that you would want third-party solutions and applications that received email and processed it, and then it came on to 365, and that used to be the case. But Microsoft is good at a lot of things, and one thing they're good at is either buying or building technology that they see they need. And in the case of what's now called Microsoft Defender for Office, I would say third-party spam filtering and email handling is simply, it's not necessary, but more importantly, it actually causes more holes in your security. There's a vendor, Barracuda. They provide third-party spam filters, but unfortunately their devices themselves got hacked, and so attackers literally could access all the email on this device. So we're also at Stringfellow, I'm very interested in how do we make things simple. I still want to use best of breed solutions. I don't want to make it simple and then not work. But the reality is Microsoft has kind of figured this out. And so all of that intelligence that the spam filters and things in your organization, it'll learn over time. It's actually quite good. And if this isn't set up right and managed, it can, there can be false positives in emails, but our experience has been it does a very good job at really cutting down on junk mail and spam. And it also does a good job if you do happen to click on a link you shouldn't have, it'll catch those and do some reporting on it and that kind of stuff. So Office Defender should be turned on and configured. The specific product, there's safe links and safe attachments, but that should be configured in your environment. I will say that there are still those that think there's better spam filters or whatever, and to them I would just say, if you wear 2 raincoats, you're not drier, you're just hot. So if you have 2 spam filters, you're not more protected. I would suggest you're probably just causing more frustration for your users. So we're a big fan of Office Defender. Again, you have to have the proper licensing to enable that. I know we said, I think 4 things, but I threw a bonus in here. We're seeing this more and more as needed in these practices, but the compliant device model. So we've talked all about passwords and we've talked about, protecting the credentials, but a big piece of this is checking that the device you're accessing is in a known good state. Daniel probably could speak more to this in large healthcare organizations that he's had a lot of history with. This has been going on forever, right, Daniel?
Yeah, it starts with your policies that you want to roll out, and in large organizations, they're very rigid, right? There is no swag or exceptions in a lot of these things, and that's the only way they can maintain consistency and compliance, whether it's a patch standard or a hardware set or an OS standard. So.
Yeah, and so in smaller practices, sometimes we don't have the luxury of controlling and providing devices, and sometimes the folks do work from home on machines. So back to security and flexibility, we want that, but I would say as we move forward, the model of if you're going to access, email 365, any of your corporate systems, you're going to want this compliant device model in place, because what that means is even if you're completely compromised from a username and a password standpoint and all of those things, but the hacker doesn't have a compliant device, which they won't have, then they will be denied. They won't be able to get in. So in our opinion, this is kind of the next step to that zero trust journey. But you got to get there, and that's why it's a bonus. But I do think this compliant device model is something that we're trying to put in most organizations as they mature and they're ready for it. So that's all for 365. I hope that was useful. Those are just kind of 4 quick things. It's licensing, and then once that's right, some basic configuration things that you can do. Obviously, you can get in touch with us and we can dive into your specific situation and how we can help. I do think it's important to talk about the end users and training, and then just kind of security policies in general. So I'm gonna let Daniel kind of touch on our thoughts on end user security and how they can participate in this.
Yeah, so with end user security, a lot of it comes down to education. And so, there's a lot of phishing, a lot of malware, a lot of spam, and our users need to be educated on how to identify interesting traffic, so to speak, as we used to say in the old days, by just looking at the sender, and sometimes looking at the sender's email address, and does it marry up with the name? Is it internal domain? Is it an external domain? And a lot of that stuff will help a user reduce the risk for your organization as it relates to clicking on something that they will give their credentials to. And then the scores you're seeing here show whether these users are going through training, whether they're reacting to a phishing test in emails, and if they are, can they go out and get training on those things, and then increase their score of training because they're taking periodical training on how to identify phishing attempts. So it's really critical to do not just annual training, but training after a compromised or a failed phishing attempt that you've coordinated internally. And what I've done in past organizations is every time I would see a phishing attempt come in, I would create a IT announcement that showed the users why I've blocked this inside of the systems. And it was just it maybe happened 3-4 times a month. And I would just lay it out in a template and saying, hey, we've blocked this for this reasons, and here's why I looked at it and flagged it that way. Either it's a suspicious link, or it's a unidentified user sending it in with one of my executives' names on it. So just education is critical
and
in these situations.
We actually have embedded that into the Outlook client, or whether using the web or the thing. And so we've literally got the training built right in. So if a user, to your point, we don't have to send out the notices anymore because, oh, this looks suspicious. They click a button in real time, it'll analyze it and it'll literally tell them, hey, here's what it's seeing. So those types of tools, if technology is the problem, it's often it can also be the solution sometimes, and so that's where the users come in. So I think security training, that's got to be part of any IT service partnership, et cetera. That they've got to be providing that as well. So let's talk briefly. Security never stops, right? Like, so how does all this, so great. So we go do this one time and we set it all up and it's done. I mean, how do we stay ahead?
Yeah, I think a lot of it just comes down to your security strategy, right? So you've got to have a plan. Without that plan, you're just going to be reactive. And then you've got to make sure you've got the right tool sets, to your point earlier on, I got to have the right licensing, I've got to have the right standards and policies, and I've got to have an operational team that can implement those things systemically. And so it's really critical that if you don't have that internal knowledge to help you with that plan, is to find a good partner. And what I would say is that's the case for any industry, not just healthcare even. So get a plan together, get on a roadmap to get yourself into a position. And we've chosen O365 as our platform because we can do, with the right licenses, we can implement something that will meet all of these check boxes for us and give us more visibility to threats and vulnerabilities so we can react faster.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's a continuous kind of cycle. I would say, I don't know about winning. I mean, what I want is for practices to be as safe and secure as reasonable and possible, and then also to balance that with productivity and usefulness. Trying to be respectful of time. We got, I think, just a couple minutes here till top of the hour. Conclusion and next steps. So, I hope this was helpful. You could take this back to your internal IT team, and hopefully that would give them some steps to get some of these things implemented. The reality is this is a little bit of a bigger journey and more in depth than what we've made it today. That just turning this stuff on actually is not, it will impact users. I mean, you got to have a rollout plan. Unfortunately, it's not just switches and you turn it on and it's done. It's a little more involved in that. And again, to Daniel's point, it's a continuous thing. So these recommendations that we gave today weren't, some of the technology wasn't even there built into 365 2 or 3 years ago. So it's constantly changing. But we hope to continue to do more of these types of seminars on specific technologies. I think we've got some teed up around Microsoft Teams in the future and how that can increase productivity and security, because now we're taking files and areas where we work and putting that in the cloud, where hopefully your EHR and other systems are headed. And if we can get those in the cloud and they're behind the 365 setup that we've talked about today that's secured, then it's kind of one less thing that we have to worry about. Thank you for attending today. Had a good turnout. We appreciate everybody taking some time to listen to us. You're welcome to email learnmore@stringfellow.com, and someone will get in touch with you if you have specific questions or comments on this. And you can always go to our website at www.stringfellow.com. There should be a big contact us button. Click on that and we will get in touch with you that way. Daniel, thanks for being here and look forward to next time.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, take care. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.